Hello, my name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson, and I want to welcome all of you to today's meeting. Our speaker today is Reginald Bowling. Reginald, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing well too. Thanks so much for being here today. And he is running for Arizona Secretary of State. He was first elected in 2014 as a state representative in LD 27 up in the Phoenix area. And now he is serving his fourth term in the legislature, and he's the Democratic leader in the House of Representatives of Arizona. Reginald is the founder of the largest Black-led voting rights and community engagement organizations in the state. He's the executive director and founder of Our Voice, Our Vote, Arizona, and also the Arizona Coalition for Change. These organizations have registered more than 50,000 people to vote, providing opportunities for young people to engage in politics and to deliver real change for hardworking Arizona families. Reginald's single mother worked 2 jobs to put food on the table for her sons. And inspired by his mom, he defied the odds to become a first-generation college graduate, special education math teacher, and civic engagement champion. And as I mentioned earlier, we're all interested in how you're going to keep Mark Fincham out of the Secretary of State's office. And with that, Reginald, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you all. I'm really excited this afternoon. Anytime I get an opportunity to talk about the Secretary of State's race with our friends, whether it's in Southern Arizona or wherever at in Arizona, I'm always excited to dive in. So I'll first start and tell you a little bit about, myself. Larry did a great job, but I'll talk to you a little bit about myself, about, the time that we're in right now, this office and why it matters. And for me, this is extremely important because democracy absolutely is on the line, but it's more than just a slogan. It's more than just what we hear people say day in and day out. Mom at home, she really did an awesome job and really showed, what hard work and opportunity was. And she really encouraged myself and my brothers to dream big. And that's what we've been doing, dreaming big and trying to put those dreams into reality. For me, growing up, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I would find myself in my room at night watching TV shows like Law and Order and The Practice, pretending to grill the witness on the stand to stand up for my client. That was my orientation. But the reality is I didn't know what steps you needed to take to become a lawyer. The community that I grew up in, it was a hard-working town in Ohio. And if you worked the factory job, that was great. If you had an opportunity to get involved with, one of the unions there, that was even a better opportunity there. But there wasn't a lot of industry. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know the questions I needed to ask. So at one point, I thought you could go from high school to law school. I didn't know those questions. And because I had an awesome mentor, awesome educator, and also just an awesome mom that really helped show me the ropes, I was able to go on to the University of Cincinnati and study at one of the top criminal justice schools in the country. And it was there that I learned about not only just the pathway to becoming a lawyer, but the LSAT and all of these tests that you needed to take in order to actually get into law school. And I was lucky, I did pretty well. I was lucky enough that I was offered a full ride law school scholarship to one of the top schools in the country. And I was on my way to law school. And then I had something that many may call, survivor's remorse. And that I often thought, there were so many people who grew up in this community like me who did not have an opportunity like I did. And I wanted to give back. So I decided to turn down a full ride law school scholarship, moved across the country to Phoenix to become a special education teacher in South Phoenix. And I can tell you it was the best decision that I ever made in my life. Teaching my students really inspired me and still inspires me to this day. And, those students who I taught, they had all of the knowledge and skills that they needed. But what they lacked was access and opportunity. Because what we know here in America and Arizona, many times it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And for many of my students, they just didn't know people. They didn't know what questions to ask. So it provided them with not a lot of opportunity to even put that knowledge and skill that they had to good use. So I wanted to tackle the education system to figure out how we could change that. So I decided to see how else I can make an impact in education. And so I became an instructor at Arizona State University. And there I taught students who were going to become educators themselves. I did that for 3 years. But what I saw in K-12 education was the same thing I saw in our universities, is that you had legislators and lawmakers down at the state capitol that hadn't been in classrooms for 20 plus years making decisions about our kids, making billion-dollar decisions about our kids. And it was something that I believe that we needed to make sure that we had somebody standing up and fighting for the little guy, who's fighting for our students who don't have the ability to vote, those K-12 students, who's standing up and fighting for our university students, where now we're spending more to incarcerate people than we are in our universities. So I decided to run for office. And I can tell you, I am extremely excited. And it was it was hard work knocking on doors, talking to people in our community about a vision of where we can go. And for me, I envision people going to the store and buying things that they want, not just things that they need. I envision a community where people have to, where they can work one job and take care of their family. And those are some of the things that we talked about in my campaign. And that allowed us to build some of the largest ground game support that we ever seen in that district. And now I've served over 7 years in the state legislature. The last 3 years, I've served in Democratic leadership. 2 years ago, I was the House Democratic Whip, the number 3 ranking Democrat, and now I serve as the House Democratic Leader. And that's significantly important because right now we have the largest Democratic caucus since 1966. There are 31 Republicans in that House and 29 Democrats. So when I sit down and I negotiate with the governor or sit down and negotiate with the speaker, I'm negotiating from a power of strength because we know that now is our time and now is an opportunity for us to flex that strength and that muscle. And that's why 2022 is important, but even beyond that, because we know we've been fighting for those gains. So I'm often not a person that spends a lot of time talking about the work that I do, but my campaign team says that you need to talk a little bit more about the work that you do. So I'm going to brag a little bit, if that's okay with you. Over the last 7 years, I've been able to pass more Democratic bills than any other lawmaker in the state of Arizona. Bills that make an impact on our people's lives. So right now, we know homelessness is a significant issue. And one simple aspect of homelessness is many times you have people who may be homeless and on the street who may not have identification. A simple state ID. And we know state IDs can prevent you from enrolling your kids to school. It can prevent you from cashing a check. It can prevent you from actually going into a shelter. In many instances, not having an ID can prevent you from living and ending homelessness. So I wrote a bill that would provide any homeless person, any homeless veteran in the state of Arizona with the free identification. I feel that's the very minimum that the state of Arizona should be doing. It's providing you with the free ID so you can actually get to the pathway for homelessness. So I had that bill signed into law. Additionally, for our foster youth, many times we have foster youth who want to work, they want to get a job, but they are trapped in a foster care system in which caseworkers have hundreds of kids every single day. So I wrote a bill that will allow our foster youth not only have instant access to getting state IDs with their birth certificates, so when they have job offers, they can actually get the materials that they need in order for them to work. One simple common sense reform is that we all know that criminal justice reform and community and policing is something that you can't get away from here in our country. So I made a common sense approach and became first in the nation to lead this approach. So if I ask 10 of you right here, what do you do when you're stopped by police officers? I'm 100% sure I'll get 10 different answers from every single one of you. Because we all learn different things, right? Some people will say you put your hands on the steering wheel. Some will say you reach in the glove compartment. Some will say you turn on the dome light. We all will say different things. So I actually did it. I asked 10 different constituents, what do you do when you're stopped? And then I actually asked 10 different police agencies, what should people do when they're stopped by you? And I got 10 different answers from every single police agency, which showed me two things. One, that in one of the most intense situations in people's lives, you have people who are really nervous, you have officers who are nervous, and they're both expecting opposite things. So what I was able to do was work with the department, work with MVD, work with ADOT, to now in every single manual in the state of Arizona, if you're getting a driver's license, it actually spells out what you should do when you're stopped by the police. And if you're a police officer, every single law enforcement officer that now enters the academy and goes through AZ Post, it has the exact same language. So what we're trying to do is teach people common sense approach. And we were first in the country to do that. And we got a lot of national recognition of CNN. And now we've seen over 32 countries follow the lead. And I was responsible for that. And the last piece, this past June, Joe Biden introduced another federal holiday, Juneteenth, which we all were thankful for. But here in Arizona, if you didn't know, we were 45th, the 45th state to actually have Juneteenth as a law. That was one of the first bills I wrote in law and was able to get Republicans and Democrats together to pass those bills. So I had an opportunity to pass a number of different pieces of legislation at the state capitol to really show that we can get common sense work done. And many people have said, you've been very successful at the state legislature. So why Secretary of State? Where's the transition? And it goes back to my story and my life. The world had enough attorneys and they needed more teachers. That's why I decided to turn down that full ride law school scholarship. And right now the world has enough politicians and we need more leaders. And right now in this moment, democracy absolutely is on the line. We absolutely need people that can provide confidence, not only to Democrats, but to independents and to Republicans. We have to have people that have experience bringing folks together and a track record of solving problems. And as Larry mentioned, I serve as the co-executive director and founder of one of the largest state civic engagement organizations, the Arizona Coalition for Change. Yes, we've registered over 50,000 people who have provided hundreds of people jobs. Offices in Tucson, Phoenix, and also Pinal County as well. If you all remember, in 2020, the voter registration deadline was extended here in the state of Arizona. There was a group who actually sued the state to say that, hey, there's people who are being told to stay inside because it's COVID, which is then preventing them from having an opportunity to actually register to vote. So for people who have access to the internet, it's perfect. They can vote, they can register, but what about those people who don't? So we sued the state of Arizona in federal court and we won. And we've got 10 extra days to register people to vote. And 35,000 people registered in those 10 days for the 2020 election. And our election was decided by 10,000 votes. Joe Biden won by a little over 10,000 votes. And I'd like to believe that the work that we did by suing the state, by extending the voter registration deadline, played a role in the outcome that we saw in 2020. So I'm excited. I'm excited about this work and this run because I have a history and a track record of getting this work done. And contrary to what people believe, the Secretary of State office is not about running elections. That's what our county recorders do. Our Secretary of State, they certify elections. Their job is to serve as the chief election officer, to get more people on the rolls, to make sure that they're actively engaged, to use the bully pulpit of the office to save democracy, and also to serve as the lieutenant governor. So whoever is our Secretary of State, they must have an experience of actually passing state budgets, which I've helped pass. I've been part of 7 budget negotiations. They must have experience passing laws. And I've been in the rooms negotiating things, special legislation like opioid or water rights, legislation to actually pass and make sure that our state can actually operate. And they also must have the support of other elected leaders. And I can tell you right now, we have more than 20 state and Senate members of the legislature who have endorsed our campaign. The mayor of Tucson, Flagstaff, Tempe, and others are endorsing our campaign. And we are truly building a movement to really allow us to move forward. This is much more than just a moment of the cyber ninjas and the audit, because it's easy for us to get caught up in that. But we know our elections in 2022, and the cyber ninjas and the audit may not be a thing. So we need someone that can live beyond the moment and to truly build a movement for democracy. And we're building that movement. And that also earned us the first national endorsement from an organization that's fighting for democracy, who's supporting our campaign as well. So I welcome your support. I welcome your vote. I welcome any conversations that we have, because now is the time for us to make sure that we keep this seat in Democratic hands now is the time that we protect our democracy.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Lillian Fox. Why don't you unmute yourself?
I have to agree. What you had to say this morning was very impressive. May I ask how old you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been serving in our state legislature the last 7 years. So I was actually one of the youngest lawmakers elected in our state at the age of 28. I'm 35 years old right now. So we could be brother and sister, essentially.
I would say you look even younger than that, but you have such an impressive record. I would imagine you're going to appeal to a lot of young people because you are younger. But what are you going to do about older people like me who maybe don't know about you and wonder how you could do stuff because you look too young?
You know, whether you're old, young, black, white, brown, the reality is we want people that have a track record of getting things done. And I put my track record against anyone in this race or anyone who's running. And I think that's why we've shown support at the state legislature. I'm still probably one of the youngest lawmakers at the state capitol and serve as the Democratic leader that's still sitting and negotiating right across the room from the governor as well. Bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctorate. So these are all things that in a short period of time that I've been able to accomplish lead to $1 million organizations and have hired over 200 people. So in a short period of time, if we were able to do this by 35, with your help and being one of the youngest secretaries of state here in our country, just imagine what we'll be able to do by age 40.
I think anybody who hears you speak would be impressed, and age wouldn't be an issue at all. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're running.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question from Gail Kimaris. Gail, go ahead.
Sure. My question is, how can we support your campaign, number one? And number two, just to remind people, you can go onto the current Secretary of State's website and sign candidate petitions, including one for Reginald.
So thank you, Gail. That's a great question and a great point as well with regards to visiting the current Secretary of State's website. The first thing that I would do is, I would definitely encourage you. I just dropped in the chat box our email, our website. I would encourage you to log onto the website. If you are able to make a contribution, I absolutely would support that, because what we do know is that Arizona actually had the most expensive media. It was the most expensive media market in the country in 2020. For instance, if those of you who didn't know, Mark Kelly raised wait for it, $99 million last cycle, which means that you saw $99 million. That was just Mark Kelly. That didn't count, any other race or anyone else who put in money, which means that it drove the media cycle up for everybody. And for us, the Secretary of State's office is one of many offices at the top of the ticket that will get a lot of attention. We have our U.S. Senate race again. We also have the governor's office, but we also have our Secretary of State's office that I would argue, and I actually just came back from Washington, D.C. and made this case, as I believe that the Secretary of State's office is probably one of the Arizona Secretary of State's office is probably one of the top 10 most important races in the country. As if you remember, in 2020, after President Trump lost his election, he was picking up the phone, calling governors and Secretary of States in battleground states like Arizona, like Georgia. And I can tell you this, if we didn't have a Democratic Secretary of State that actually certified the election, who knows if Joe Biden would have got Arizona's electors. If we didn't have, thankfully at the time, a Georgia Secretary of State that actually stood up, who knows if those Georgia electoral votes would have went. And this Secretary of State here in Arizona, who will be elected next year, will be the Secretary of State in office for our next presidential election. So I can tell you this, that Joe Biden and Democrats nationally, they have a vested stake in this race. Republicans do as well. And that's why President Trump just endorsed my opponent, Mark Finchem, because Mark Finchem, he wrote an email to his supporters. And he said, if I was Secretary of State, I would have made sure that in 2020, we won, which indicated he would have somehow, messed with the results to make it more difficult. And those are the stakes here. And we have to have someone that can win a general election here in the state of Arizona. And I know if I'm against Mark Fincham, I am 100% confident that we'll win the general election against any of the Republican candidates in this race right now, based on our track record and our support that we've been able to garner. And I think that has to be a significant deciding factor for people when we're voting in August and also in November. Who can actually be the Republican in the race to make sure we take the state? So I would encourage you, if you're able to, visit our website, make a contribution. If you're able to throw a house party, I'll travel to Tucson in a heartbeat. It only takes me 90 minutes on a good day. And on a bad day, about 120 minutes. I'll travel down there anytime, anywhere. I'm always on the highway. Host a house party. Let's do something virtually, because this is really going to take all of us to roll up our sleeves. And I say that as someone's not wearing sleeves right now. You may have not noticed that with the collar, but yeah.
All right, Susie Anderson has a question. Go right ahead, Susie.
Hi, Reginald. It's so good to have you here. And you impress us Democrats and some independents with your background, with your knowledge of state law and knowledge of the legislature. But in order to sway Republicans, I've read some articles recently that if you attach a Trump message to your opponent, like in California, you're more likely to sway voters to your side. And that should be an easy thing since you're running against Mark Fincham. Do you plan to use that as a tactic in your campaign?
Yes and no, right? Because I truly believe that people don't want to vote against something, they want to vote for something. And I think we ran into a trap when we saw this with Secretary Clinton a while back, where we felt like if we just said, Trump wasn't good enough, then people would automatically go to the polls and they would support, Secretary Clinton. And I think right now here in Arizona, Republicans, independents, and Democrats, they want common sense. We all know that this audit is Looney Tunes. We don't believe that a secret plane came over from China with bamboo ballots and really landed on the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. No, I mean, we don't, no sane person believes that, right? But I also believe that there are some people who believe the narrative that our elections weren't ran right. And there's two things I can do. I can say that they're crazy, don't listen to them, or I can listen to them and actually speak, facts, speak truth to power, what actually happened. Because I think if we go around this, if we go the tit for tat, let me alienate you, you alienate me, I don't think we gain any ground. I think people need someone who is has a common sense approach, a steady hand, pragmatic, that can walk in a room and build relationships with anybody. With that said, it's important for people to recognize the stakes. And the stakes is that if you elect Mark Fincham, that is essentially saying that you are doing whatever you can to make sure that a Trump or a Trump-like person ends up in DC next time. If you elect Michelle Ugenti-Rita, who's also in the primary, who wrote the largest voter suppression piece of legislation in our state's history, you can good and well be sure that it's going to be much more harder for folks who are older voters, rural voters, people of color to vote next time, because that's what she's going to stand up and do. And you can bet if you elect someone like, I would say probably one of the most dangerous individuals, which is Shauna Bullock, whose husband is on the Arizona Supreme Court, who many people may not know about her, so they may think that she's safe, but that she's not. She actually wrote a bill that would take away all of the powers from the Secretary of State and Governor's office to certify elections and leave that up to a partisan legislature. So the reality is none of them are good options. And we're going to talk about a common sense approach where we're going to let people know what the stakes are. And we hope to, use our history and our track record of building nonpartisan, bipartisan coalitions to move forward. So you make a great point, Susan.
All right, we've got a question here from Carolyn Klassen, who is wondering what you think about the Maricopa audit. They're supposed to come out with a report, by the end of the month sometime, yet they're still fighting to turn over records. Whatever they come out with, do you think it's going to be credible with the voters of Arizona?
I don't. I mean, polling shows right now that, voters, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent, you believe the audit is not credible. It's not real. It's a partisan audit. I think that one thing that I knew, I think we all knew this, once you had a group of partisan individuals say, who said the election was stolen, and we're gonna try to audit the election just to make sure that it checked out right. We all knew that they weren't going to say, all's good, nothing to see here. I mean, I don't think any of us expected. I don't think any of us expected them to say, all good. This is what we knew it was going to always be, which turned out to be a fundraising juggernaut for Republicans. So you no longer have President Trump to fundraise off of. So now let's use this audit. And then next year, there'll be something else, right? So I think we all knew what those results are. The sad thing, though, is that everyone secretly likes the audit. And I'm going to explain that. Democrats believe it allows us to show how crazy Republicans are. And Republicans, they believe it allows them to show how fraught the system is, and essentially how to motivate their base. They're using it to motivate their base and say that I told you the system was not what we thought it was. So both Republicans and Democrats secretly like the audit, but at what cost? And I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter and saying, audit this and cyber ninjas that. I could. I mean, it'll get applause and it'll get folks fired up. But the reality is that this is a moment. This is a moment in time. And we need to make sure that we build democratic movements. People have to have a record beyond talking points and a record beyond just what someone else is not doing. And I truly believe that no matter if you're running for U.S. Senate, governor, secretary of state, or you're running for school board, you need to be able to show people, why you? I know why not them, but why you? And I think that we have to have that message, because if we expect to win the governor's race by just saying Kari Lake is crazy, which we may all know, right? But that's not going to be enough, right? If we expect to say whoever is running against, Mark Kelly, they're just going to be a vote for McConnell. That's just not enough. So we need to talk about the things that we're doing. We need to have a common sense approach, pragmatic, and get our folks back fired up. There's still a pandemic out here. People are still trying to survive. Folks literally are passing. Like, we need something to motivate us. It has to be more than just the cyber ninjas and audit. That's one of many things. But we need people. We need people that are going to motivate us and fire us up and inspire us to get back out there and do this work.
All right, let's turn to Dr. Barbara Warren. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, I wanted to thank you very much, Reggie, for your very impressive career and your candidacy. Everything you have to say is really very inspiring. I have two silly questions because I don't get out much. One question is, do you have any Democratic opponents that you think are running now or will be running? And the second question is, what is the right thing to do if we're stopped by a cop?
Good questions. I often get that. So I'll start with the first one. Yes, we have a Democratic primary. And I think that, I have never ran in a race in which I haven't had a primary. So for me, it's like second nature. For me, like, I think it's one of those things that like motivates me. And I think it's good for voters to have choices, to have options. And it's not great because you have to spend a ton of money that you can be focusing on Republicans with, but you have to do it in the primary. But I do think it motivates our folks. So I have one other person who's running. There were a few others who had thought about jumping in the race, but they have since endorsed our campaign. So we've been able to coalesce around that aspect. And then with regards to what do you do when you're stopped by police? So I'm gonna put a quote around here. This is the right thing. I can tell you what's in the book now, and what we're training people to do is that if you're stopped by police officers, we're asking folks, let's put your hands on the steering wheel. And if it's night, it's turn on your dome light. So it's about visibility and it's about hands. And that's what we're also training our law enforcement officers to look at visibility and to look at hands. Because right now, many of us, we learn by who we were passengers with, right? And who we saw. No one, you don't have that conversation. What do? You just do what you think you do or do what you saw on TV, right? So it's hands, and then obviously you're not reaching for anything, which is extremely important because Arizona is open carry, and you have people who may have guns on them. And what happened with Falandra Castile, many of us actually pushed me to create this, that we don't want people to be lawfully carrying because they may have that right. And this is not if we agree to that or not. It is what it is, right? We want people to still make sure that they're safe. So hands on the steering wheel, and if it's at nighttime, turn on the light. Which I never knew that was best practice to turn on the car light. So I learned something new through the process.
Thank you. Who is your Democratic opponent?
His name's Adrian Fontes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question from Susie Anderson. Go ahead, Susie, unmute yourself.
Hi again, Reginald. Who is running for your seats? Because we can't lose any because all of our good people are running for state office. We need to make sure we've got good, strong people running for the seats that you might vacate.
Yeah, no, Susie, that's a great question. I mean, when I think about one thing that keeps me up at night besides my 20-month-old little girl, is thinking about next legislative cycle, and then also next legislative session. So actually, I'm not sure if you all heard the news today. One member of my caucus actually just resigned today in order to run for, he's already running for governor, but he's resigned today. So now we have 2 open seats in the House of Representatives right now, like today. We expect that to be up to 4 open seats like in 2021. So I'm going to have at least 4 new caucus members next year to jump into the 2022 session. And with that being said, with redistricting, you have everyone's running in a new district. Some people are retiring, some people are running for state office or federal office, and some people are going for the Senate. So it's going to be imperative that we have strong lawmakers. We're lucky in our district. We've been really building a bench and a base. Right now, there's about 7 or 8 people who've indicated interest, who all are pretty good. I think everyone right now is waiting to see what the IRC does. And as of late, I've been calling it the Independent Republican Commission, although it's the Independent Redistricting Commission, and fingers crossed that we actually get fair maps. But the IRC, I think, is going to be important. I think my district will probably remain, more than likely, we'll have Democrats there, but there's some other districts that we need to make sure that we have fair maps, because literally, had not an abnormality happened last cycle, the legislature should be 30-30 right now. I mean, that's just absolutely. We lost a Democratic seat that we historically haven't lost. So it should be 30-30. And I think if we have maps very similar to what we have right now, then I think by no question, Democrats take the House. They probably take the Senate as well. So we got a good deal of folks. And I know in Tucson, I mean, you guys are gonna have some open seats, and because we have a lot of great lawmakers down there who are doing a number of things, and we have to make sure Tucson, Phoenix, Flagstaff, everywhere that we put our best up.
All right, let's turn to Lillian Fox. She's got a question.
I was wondering, I think the thing having in the driver's manual about what to do when you're stopped by the police is really important, because I have some friends who have been really concerned about that. The question I had, is there any advice about what passengers should do when a car is stopped by police?
Yeah, so I mean, so there's still consistent stakeholder meetings that are happening right now on this topic, because obviously with criminal justice, it's literally, and police reform, there's a long line of topics. And actually, This year, and didn't talk about it, but I was able to do something that we have not been able to do in decades at the legislature, is bring Republicans and Democrats together to actually pass through committee simple police reform, which was in the instance that you have an officer involved shooting, that you have a third party investigation, which just seems like that's a no-brainer. We were able to get Republicans and Democrats to agree with that, and then ultimately politics took place. But with regards to passengers, what the recommendations that we've had has still been hands and visibility. Is not spelled out in the driver's manual, and I'm not entirely sure right now what it says with AZ Post for our officers being trained. But I think that is extremely important as well. Just because it creates, we create intense situations that we want to make sure that we can lower the pressure.
We've got another question from Phil Lopes. Go right ahead, Phil.
Are you running clean? And if you're not, why not? And if the reason is you don't think you can raise enough money for this race, how much would you get from clean elections if you ran clean? And how much do you think you need for this race? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. To answer the question, no, I'm not running with public financing, and it absolutely is the reason why you mentioned in your second point is that we don't believe that we'd have enough money to actually compete in a Democratic primary or a general election. Right now, to give you a instance of what happened last cycle. So Secretary Hobbs, she raised about $1 million. That's how much that race costed. Clean elections would give a candidate for Secretary of State about 1/10 of that, a little over $100,000 to actually utilize that money throughout the state of Arizona, which just simply isn't enough. We know we have legislators who have had to raise, $100,000 just to compete in their race. We estimate that the Secretary of State race now is probably going to be 2 to 3 times more expensive than it was when Katie Hobbs ran. And it's just simply not, we simply don't have that luxury. If we had the ability to go back to something, like matching funds that could actually lay a level playing field, we would run for that. And that's something that I've been a supporter of in my time at the legislature. But to win this seat, we just don't have the ability or the luxury to do that.
Andrea Kennedy, go right ahead. You're up.
Thank you, Reginald, for coming here today. You're a ball of fire. I'm really glad you turned down a full ride scholarship to law school to come to Arizona because we need you. And just comment on this thought. One reason that the Republicans are passing voter suppression laws, besides to take back the House and Senate, so they will have people in place, laws in place, and people to jigger the results when Trump runs again. So they figure they'll do this and he'll win. What's your thought on that?
I agree 100%. I mean, I think that even if it's not Trump, there will be a Trump-like person who's going to run. I think that they've been laying the seeds of this for a number of years. Actually, when you go on Facebook, it tells you the memories that you had from years ago. And this literally was shocking to me because I went back and looked at, the memories of several years ago, looking at it right now. So September 20th, 2012, I had 17 states were trying to enact restrictive voter registration laws. This was in 2012. And the states, coincidentally, those states made up 218 electoral college votes. So in 2012, they were trying to change voter registration laws because they knew, and all of the states that had an impact for the presidential. We saw it again when you look back several years ago, like a couple years ago, right? The same, voter registration laws and now taking removing people from the rolls. This is something that we've consistently seen. And if it's not Trump, it's going to be a Trump-like person. The demographics are the demographics, right? People are inspired by the idea that they shouldn't have to scrap by for everything that they have, right? Like you just want policies that would actually value you as a person. You want policies and people who are gonna actually stand up for you. And I think that now that we've engaged more people in the system, the demographics and knowledge is allowing people to know that there's lawmakers who haven't been showing up for them, and they're no longer going to let that happen. So I think you're dead on. I think the voter suppression laws is to allow someone like Trump or Trump next cycle, and I don't think they're going to stop. I don't think they're going to stop. We saw them packing the courts, and we could probably talk another hour about the courts because that's a whole nother strategy that they went through. But this is something that we have to be in it for the long haul. And we have, at very minimum, we got to make sure we have our people in office to stop some of these laws. And it looks like you were making a sandwich there or something. So I'm gonna shoot you my address and send me a sandwich. This is lunchtime for me too. So yes.
I've got a question for you, Reginald, and it has to do with Katie Hobbs. What would you do differently from Katie Hobbs as Secretary of State, and what policies would you continue and emphasize?
I don't think a lot of people have spent a lot of time recognizing the importance of the Secretary of State's office. So I really want to applaud Secretary Hobbs for raising and elevating the profile of the office, even since it's been under attack, because I think people really truly need to understand what this office does. I think for me, there's a few different things that do differently. One is to make sure that we are actively engaging our voters of color, our elderly voters, our rural voters immediately. And I'm going to talk to you about why. Right now, when we look at our laws like Senate Bill 1485 is directly targeted toward particular populations, older voters, people of color, and those who live in rural communities. And the reason why they're doing that is because these voters are more engaged now than they've ever been. And when these voters vote actively, Democrats always win, no matter where you're at across the country, no matter where you're at. So we're going to be doing things like, this is the teacher in me, right? Like National Voter Registration Day is actually next week. So there's no reason why in every single school across this state, we shouldn't be registering our 17 and a half year olds to vote immediately. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing that. Most people don't even know that National Voter Registration Day is a thing, let alone that, if you're 17 and a half years old, you can get registered to vote. So we're going to be looking at things like, how do we actively get voters from day one to be part of democracy? Because we know if you engage voters now, you can keep them engaged later. So we'll elevate that by having those conversations. I think also I plan to be involved from a legislative approach. Like the days when a Secretary of State cannot use their voice to talk about bills that are going to suppress the vote, those days are gone. I mean, I plan to stand up for our communities if we see a legislature that's making it more harder for people to register, harder for people to stay on the rolls after they have been registered, and then making it more restrictive for folks to get access to the ballot. So I'll be much more vocal at the legislature. That's something that I also plan to do. And then I also think that the biggest piece is a collaboration across the state. We need to make sure that we are working hand in hand with all groups, not just Democratic groups, whether you're Democrat, Independent, Republican, Green, whatever. We need to be working with community to let them know how they can actively engage people in the office, giving them the materials that they need to make sure that they are engaged, and teaching people about the political process. Because as someone who leads a civic engagement organization, one mistake that we often make is we tell voters just to register to vote and we stop there. We got to get people registered to vote. That's not enough. That's literally the first step. Registering to vote is just like putting on your socks. You haven't even left the house yet. So we need to register to vote. Then we need to put on our shoes and see like who are the candidates running for office. Then we need to step outside and actually play and actually turn out to vote. So for me, I want to make sure that this office is giving the full voter education process. We're not just going to talk about registration. how do you actually have a role at the legislature? How do you have a role at your city council? How do you have a role in your county government? So people can actively get involved and engaged. But we shouldn't just be tracking how many people we register. How many people are engaged? How many people participated in the process?
Well, with that, Reginald, we've exhausted all of the questions. So I was wondering if you could sum up the meeting for us and tell us what are different ways people can find out about your campaign and how can Democrats in Tucson support you?
Yeah, so first, again, I want to say again, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really do appreciate you all giving me the opportunity to be here and just talk a little bit about myself in this race and the stakes and what it means. We're going to be hosting a Tucson kickoff in October, and I'll make sure to send the information to you, Larry, so we can disseminate as well. We'll have a launch actually this Thursday here in Phoenix with a number of our supporters as we have built up our base. But so one, I'm going to encourage you to, when we're out in Tucson, I understand it is COVID, so the CDC guidelines, mask up recommendations. So if you can't get out, we understand. We'll be doing things virtually, but if you can, we want to make sure that that we have an opportunity to meet face to face. That would be awesome. So we'll be sending that out. Secondly, I'm going to leave my website again, but I'm also going to leave my email address. And if you have anything directly, I would encourage you to email me. And then also, one thing I think is important is to have, direct access to candidates. Also leave my cell phone number there as well. Take my contact information. If you're able to host any house parties, I'll be there. If it's in person, if it's virtual, let's make that happen. Let's do the work that we can. Because we have to elevate this office. We have to make sure that people understand that this is one of the top 10 most important offices in our country, and we cannot allow for Mark Fincham or Mark Fincham-like folks to be in this seat.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And Reginald, I want to say thank you very much for addressing our group today. And thank you to everybody in Democrats of Greater Tucson for attending. Let's get the word out about our good Democratic candidates. And with that, I'm going to have to say meeting is now at a close. Thanks all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.